This is how I made a 5-minute action film using Seedance 2.0 and Kling 3.0. I made this for the Higgsfield AI Action Contest. I started late and made it across 9 long days and generating about 370 clips for it. Before I wrote my script, I wanted to set the environment. So I started generating different images in Midjourney, playing around with different prompts and ideas for different settings. And I used Midjourney specifically because it gives some really great cinematic looking environments. It wasn't always going to be a desert world. I was playing a lot with this volcanic world idea as well, but in the end decided to go with the desert. Once I knew where this would be set, I could work on the story. My initial inspiration actually came from Rise of the Planet of the Apes. James Franco's character has an aging father who has Alzheimer's, and that was always something that really touched me in that film, something quite relatable with my own experiences. I took that as kind of a nugget of an idea and then came up with a basic concept of a son having to break into a camp to rescue his father. And then I essentially built the story around that idea. The goal of the film, of course, was to create an action scene, but I wanted to build it around a story so that you would hopefully care about the character and the stakes of the fight rather than it just being a cool sword fight. Now that I had a more specific world, I used Midjourney to generate a lot of ideas of what the fortress would look like built around the giant skeleton. I wanted the story to feel fairly grounded. You've got these warring tribes and there's not really any magic or anything, but then I did want to add in this giant skeleton in the middle of the whole campsite, which implies that in this world there either are or used to be these giant creatures. So it's got that mythic fantasy element, but the main story stays pretty grounded. Once I got some wider shots that I was happy with, I used Midjourney to create images of my main characters as well against a relatively plain background. Whole body shot, close up, and sometimes even a side and back shots as well. These would be the references that I'd keep coming back to in order to keep my characters consistent throughout the film. I then switched to Nano Pro to upscale and sharpen all of these images, and then pretty much from that point used Nano Pro exclusively because it's really good at changing angles and giving you different shots, all whilst keeping everything really consistent. When it comes to generating the videos, I typically start from the beginning of the film and just work in a linear fashion, but because this was for an action contest, and action can be really hard to pull off with AI, I first wanted to validate that my fight scene was actually possible, because if the fight scene didn't work, then just the whole film wouldn't work. I got access to Seedance 2.0 through a site called uart.ai. Shout out to Curious Refuge for sharing that one. I generated this image of my 2 characters preparing to fight. I didn't know if this would be exactly the final image, but it was going to be pretty close. And so then I ran it in Seedance. Needless to say, I was pretty blown away and I knew immediately like, okay, cool, this is gonna work. Now, if you haven't seen the finished film, then make sure to check that one out. I'd recommend even pausing this video and watching it now, since I'm gonna be referencing it a lot in this video, so it's worth watching first. So I then went back to the start of the film and just started to work my way through scene by scene. I predominantly generated within Higgsfield as well as Kling directly, used Kling 3.0. Then if shots were pretty simple and straightforward, I'd swap to Kling 2.6 because it was a little bit cheaper and then the final clip would look just as good. I'll show you some clips that I generated, both good and bad, and kind of talk you through the process. Okay, this is one of the early shots you see in the film. And I believe this is the one that I actually used, but this wasn't my first attempt. So I'll show you the first shot. This is what I was trying to generate. So you'll see a little difference in my prompt here. I've got the warrior is pumping a pedal with 1 foot out of the shot. The grinder is spinning while he sharpens his spear on it. So what I was going for here was he's got a little foot pedal and that's what is moving the stone wheel. The other issue with this is that I believe the wheel's actually going the wrong way. It should be going forward away from him, but instead I think it's coming towards him. And then, yeah, essentially his pedaling just doesn't look right. Here's the second generation that failed. His foot's not even pedaling at all. There's some kind of weird thing happening over here. I did use 2.6 for this. I perhaps could have used 3.0 to see whether that would have given me a better result, but I ended up just trying to simplify it for myself, and I just removed from the prompt the foot pedal thing and just get him grinding, and this was what I ended up using in the final film. When it came to cutting back to the wider shot, I was again trying to get the foot pedal thing working, but as you can see here, it was looking kind of bad. The wheel's not moving properly. He's not really grinding it normally. Then there is a second stone grind in the background, but the guy's kind of bashing his blade on it. So this didn't work. Okay, so sometimes I find that changing the prompt will fix an issue. Other times I might adjust my input image. I'll show you an example. So here's that image within Photoshop. Photoshop is one of the main tools that I use in my films. I'm constantly Photoshopping and adjusting little elements. It's very rare that I just get an image straight out of Nano Banana Pro and I'd use it. Well, I won't say it's very rare, but there's many occasions where I'll go in and I'll be fine-tuning things within Photoshop. So this is the final image, but the one that you just saw prompted was this image here. There was issues with getting this character to look like he was actually operating a grinder. So I regenerated this part to make it clear that he's using a grinder. You've got the little sparks there, so it helps the video model understand what is supposed to be happening. But when I started doing this, I also did some other things. You'll notice that the facial details here are much more improved than they originally are. I also did that with this character over here in the background that looks kind of terrible, and I did an upgrade on him, and now he looks a lot more detailed, a lot more realism in the face. In fact, I ended up doing it to the main character here as well. But I didn't just input this entire image and ask for sharpness, enhancement, that type of thing. Because I've personally found when I throw an entire image in like this, that it does improve it a little bit. Maybe I just haven't got the right prompt, but it doesn't greatly improve or reconstruct detail in the image. So what I do a lot of is I actually crop in and then I'll upscale and enhance smaller sections of the image and then download those, bring them back in here, and then mask the edges so that they fit back into the original image. Because again, I find that if I was to put this entire image in and say, hey, enhance all the faces and so forth, it might do an okay job. But if I just take this square here, export that, and then ask Nano Banana to, enhance the facial details, enhance the overall sharpness and clarity, it does an amazing job. And now I've got a really high quality image, which I bring back in here, scale it down to the right spot, and reconstruct this entire image. So this would have taken me, I don't know, at least half an hour to kind of work on this one image, even though I already had the original base image. So this is a process that I do quite a bit. I then feed that new image back into Kling, and you'll see that I was getting better results with the guy in the background grinding. It's better than it was, but as you can see, it's still not perfect. So I had to run it a couple of times, and then I think this is the final generation I ended up using. I did something on this film that I haven't done in my previous short films over at Hyperspace Stories. If you haven't checked that out, I make Star Wars AI fan films, so if you're a Star Wars fan, then make sure to check out that channel. But normally I generate all of my dialogue separately using tools like 11 Labs and then lip sync it to the video clips afterwards. However, after testing out Kling 3.0, I finally felt the performances and dialogue were good enough to generate directly in the video generations. Plus, I was really under the pump for time, so cutting out a few steps was really helpful.
Are you the bone merchant? I've been waiting for the bone merchant.
No, I'm not the bone merchant.
Kale? Yes! You're the one who owes me a goat! You thought I'd forget, didn't you?
So while you can get performances that are more nuanced and subtle than we've ever seen before, it's still far from perfect. That was just one example of a shot where the actual dialogue goes weird and out of sync. It would also happen a little bit where the shot had more than enough time to deliver the dialogue, but it would wait until the last few seconds of the shot to actually deliver it and then cut off the very end of the line. So overall, I still needed to generate shots multiple times, but I usually would end up getting the performance that I was happy with. So dialogue and performance has definitely gotten a lot better than where we were even a couple of months ago, but it's still not absolutely perfect. I'm going to be making a lot more breakdowns like this, deep dives into dialogue, prompting, and more, so subscribe if you don't want to miss those. Now, one area that even Kling 3 still isn't great at, and honestly any video model out there, is fight scenes or any complex action. Until, of course, Seedance 2.0. That was the main area that I used Seedance for, was the fight scene. Here's a couple of the prompts that I ran and their results.
You shouldn't have come back.
So with this shot, I actually used Seedance's multi-reference mode rather than just the start frame and end frame. So what this allows you to do is to upload a whole bunch of references that can be images, video, and even audio. Now, I did have my start frame, but technically in this mode, you don't have a start frame. But as you can see in my prompt, I tagged this particular image as the start frame. So essentially I was able to select my start frame. And then the other reference image that I uploaded was just a reference image of my character, Luca. So I didn't have my end frame. I wanted the model to figure out the shots for me, but because I didn't have the end frame, I just gave it the reference so that at least the character was correct, and then hopefully I could prompt it well enough to kind of get the shot that I wanted. So while this generation wasn't quite correct, I did really like the framing, the close-up shot of Luca at the end, and so I actually took that reference image, and then with some Nano banana, I then created this still frame that had the correct background. So then I went back to Seedance, and now I switched back to first frame and last frame, and now I started generating shots that were a lot closer to my final shot.
You shouldn't have come back.
I typically ran 15-second clips, and as you can see, I broke it down into multiple shots, similar to the multi-shot feature in Kling. It's just the one prompt box, but you can write the prompt like this to specify what happens at every second. You could also just get really long 10 or 15-second clips, but I really like prompting for multiple shots because Seedance 2 is really amazing at keeping the consistency of characters and location, as well as the consistency of the action within the scene. I'll try and break down some of my Seedance clips and my strategy here as clear as I can. So here's the first main clip that I generated. Okay, so I actually used most of that just as is. I didn't chop it up. But what did I actually generate? Well, it was what you see here, but then I actually prompted it to have a close-up of Kale breathing heavily and then a close-up of Luca breathing heavily. And then that took up the entire 15 seconds. The reason that I did that was so that I could take those still frames. Now I had a really great close-up still frame of Kale in the right position, and then the same with Luca, because Seedance is really good at keeping all of the angles and characters' locations really consistent. I mainly wanted to get that fight sequence, but then I wanted to get a still frame of each of their characters, because then the next clip was all of the dialogue that they needed for this little interlude. Without prompting for that within Seedance, I now would have had to have taken the end frame of that fight clip and then throw it into something like Nano Banana Pro, or use Higgsfield's angles, or one of these tools to try to get the close-up images of each of them, whereas Seedance can just knock it out of the park and probably do a better job. So now I had a couple of really great stills to set up the next Seedance shot.
Dragon lied to you. He poisoned our father, destroyed his mind.
Your father was failing, Kale. His mind was gone. Everyone saw it. Dragon did what had to be done.
Great, so that's the next little sequence here. I've color coded the final clips here so that you can see which were the same clip and which were actually different ones. So because I had these close-ups, I ended up running all of these shots just through Kling 3.0, but also Seedance, because Seedance does a great job with performances as well. And essentially I ran it through both models and just picked whichever gave the best performance. And it ended up being a combination Kling for Kale's performance, and then I used the Seedance performance for this character Luca here. I would run a Seedance shot multiple times, especially during this fight, because it still made mistakes and the backgrounds of some angles weren't correct. But because I was running the same prompt over and over, I was able to mix and match shots between takes. Here's the next sequence where I again used multiple clips to put it all together.
I found the vials, Luca. That's why he cast me out. Lies!
Okay, so I use this clip for the majority of it, but I actually replaced the line because there was like a weird little glitch here. So if I just play the original clip.
I found the vials, Luca. That's why he cast me out.
He's meant to say, I found the vials, Luca, but he says something like, I found the vices or something. Fortunately, as he says that, his mouth is kind of covered with the blades there. So on the timeline here, this audio here is from another take. And then where he says this line.
That's why he cast me out.
The original line, but this is the part here that I replaced from a different take. And then at the end of this, there's just this little moment from Luca. Lies! Where he yells out lies and then he swings his blade. It actually works pretty well, but I just liked a different take, this one here.
Lies!
So as good as Seedance 2.0 is, and again, there are a lot of times where I use the majority of a clip, there were also plenty of times where I would generate over and over and then cut together the best of those clips. So it does require you to edit video, to be able to adjust the timing, all those kinds of things. Here's another section where I cut together a couple of different takes. Okay, so I used a lot of this shot here. That was all kind of the same until the kick. And then following the kick, I cut to a different take here. Essentially, I liked this take better. But then I'm assuming that before that, I wouldn't have liked. So I used from the kick here, but let's see before that. Yeah, so the reason I didn't use this take, actually, let's just go back to the top and watch this one. That's kind of wrong. He hits the ground. He wasn't even trying to hit the character. Kale's face here doesn't look right. The background's not quite right. He knocks his sword away, which I did actually prompt for that to happen, but he's still got one in his hand as well. But I did like the kick and then moving in, pointing the blade at his throat. This was my favorite take for that. So that's why I used that. And then I really liked this angle here. So that brings me to this next shot. One of the downsides of Seedance is that it's only 720p. So sometimes the quality didn't look as good as the really nice 1080p that you get from Kling. So what I do sometimes is take a still from the Seedance shot, upscale and sharpen it with Nano Banana Pro, and then run that shot inside of Kling to get a more polished version. For example, I did that here in this shot of my character Luca standing over Kale. This is the original shot here. So there was a couple of things that were wrong. First, his face has changed a little bit, which actually makes sense because all it had was the first frame, which was just kind of the profile wide shot. So it didn't really get to see his face properly. And so it doesn't look too bad considering, but it's not quite right. And then also they're meant to be under this giant rib cage. And it kind of does it here. It was really hard to get these side angles where it was accurately depicting the giant rib bones and everything. In a lot of takes, all of that kind of stuff disappeared, and that's why this was one of the scenes that I generated a lot of takes of. And not so much because the sword fighting was bad, because that was generally really good, but it was more that I was trying to find takes that had the correct background. And so I love this shot. I love the low angle. I love Kale in the foreground here. And it almost got the background, but it wasn't quite right. So what I ended up doing was I exported this still frame and then used Nano Banana Pro to replace the face. Once I was happy with that, I then prompted it to get more bones in the background. And as you can see, there was a lot of failed attempts. I had to run this a long time until I got this image that was relatively close. Not perfect, but better. And then I brought it into Photoshop here because whilst it was better, there was still a few little improvements I could make. So I used generative fill here. This is the original image. And then I used generative fill to join those two bones. Then I removed that curved bone. Then I joined those two. And then I extended this one here. And then I just filled in that little gap at the top there just to make that section look wider and bigger. Photoshop Generative Fill is a tool that I use quite a bit as well, whether it's joining two images together, where you're just trying to blend the area between them, or removing little things from your image, and just lots of little general fixes. And so I ended up with something like this. It's still not absolutely perfect. Like, I don't think the scale is quite right. They should seem a lot bigger and probably further away, but you know, for a quick shot, I kind of get away with it. It's a lot better than this here, which doesn't look right at all. Overall, I was really happy with what I created, but turning this around in 9 days was pretty insane. If I didn't have the pressure of the deadline, I would have spent more time polishing the film. The biggest thing I'd change is the overall pacing of the story. I realized pretty soon that my story was just too big to fit within 5 minutes. And because of that, I had to rush through parts and really condense and cut out others. For example, I initially wanted more of Kale's infiltration into the camp, more evading guards and knocking some of them out. Then I also wanted more of the escape with his dad, because I think the dynamic of trying to escape with a father who has no idea what's going on just inherently adds a lot of tension and even some comedy beats. And then I also wanted the final scene to have more breathing room, especially the big event that happens in that scene. There was originally more scripted as well for Kale and Luca escaping at the very end. Currently, it's quite sudden in this current version because I just ran out of time, essentially. I think adding a few minutes to this film would actually make the best version of it. But let me show you an example of a scene that I cut down quite a bit and what that kind of looks like. I'm looking back at my first version of the timeline, and I actually got all the way to 4 minutes 45, and this is the end of the main fight scene, and there's still one big scene and an escape. So a couple of bigger scenes that come after this. So I got to this point and I realized before I move any further forward, I really need to cut this down because the contest required it to be under 5 minutes. So I'll show you an example of some of the things that I cut. I'll show you what the original intro used to be. Okay, I'll stop there because this is the shot that you would recognize from the film. Also keep in mind that this was all kind of rough anyway. When I'm first putting down all of the clips, I'm not trimming them to be kind of the final version. It's just kind of laying them down and seeing that generally it works overall, maybe throwing in a few sound effects, like these footsteps aren't really synced or, aren't quite right. So I knew this needed work, but right now I really needed to heavily cut it down. So you'll see one of the decisions that I made is that I cut this little intro here. Initially, you would see Kale's character from the distance looking in at the campsite, and then you would kind of see these cool shots of him running, and then it would kind of cut into him sneaking up from behind the skeletal tail here and then beginning the climb that you see in the film. So I realized that I could save a whole chunk of time here if I cut all of this out, and I realized that a great introduction for him could still just be this shot here where you see the guards walk past and then he emerges from behind. Other changes I would make, there's a few lines of dialogue that could have been better. There's a couple of seconds of the dad singing in a wide shot where you don't see his lips move or you don't see him singing, but that would have been a pretty time-consuming shot to fix, or I would have needed to cut around it and just go straight into a close-up sooner or figure something else out, so I just left it for this version. And then because all of the dialogue was generated with Kling and Seedance, it's not 100% consistent throughout. What I really wanted to do was to run all of that dialogue through 11 labs to a specific voice so that each character's voice was perfectly consistent. But again, I ran out of time, and fortunately I didn't think it was super noticeable, so I ended up leaving that. And then also, the color grade isn't perfect between all of the shots either. That's another thing I would have spent more time on fixing. For sound effects, I relied a lot more on getting them generated with the videos than I normally would. I generally add my own sound design when making films for hyperspace stories, but because of the time crunch, I used a lot more generated audio. For all the music, I used Epidemic Sound. For editing and post-production, I used Premiere Pro, part of the Creative Cloud, which is about $70 a month. Though, if you're looking for a free option, you could use something like DaVinci Resolve, which is really good as well. For upscaling the video, I did that locally on my computer using Topaz Video AI. I upscaled it all to 4K, so everything was the same size, and then I just added in a little bit of film grain as well. Now, I've been getting a lot of questions around the cost and the number of generations. So between my subscriptions on Higgsfield, Kling, and Design, that was around $270 US. I purchased $200 in extra credits towards the end, but only ended up using about a quarter of them. For Seedance, I spent $100 on credits initially, used that up, and then spent another $100 only for the model to get really restricted and then no longer allow faces. So it kind of became useless for me after I just spent a whole lot of money on it. Epidemic Sound is $40 a month. Adobe Creative Cloud is $70 a month. It looks like Topaz Studio has moved to a subscription model starting at $37 a month. So that's about $817 total, or if you only count the credits I actually used, that's about $577. Those are all the monthly prices, but if you're doing this kind of work regularly, then it makes sense to get annual subscriptions as you'll get better pricing. So the price for me was a little bit cheaper as I do own a few of these annual subscriptions and picked them up when they were on sale. I also used up some leftover 11 Labs credits, but it wasn't many generations, so I didn't count that. Now, if you're wanting to create something similar, this will give you an idea of cost, but honestly, it could be more or less depending on how difficult the shots are. And it's always really hard to predict. For instance, on my last full day working on this film, I spent over half a day on just a couple of shots, just a few seconds of the film. So sometimes scenes come easier, and other times you can just get stuck and have to spend a lot of time and credits on them. But I'd say at the minimum, I think you'd need the highest plan on either Higgsfield or Kling to make a film around 5 minutes. I know that I'd personally struggle on anything less than the max number of credits that you can get on either of those platforms. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. In total, it was about 370 generations, 100 final shots in the film, 9 crazy long days, but probably the equivalent of about 15 normal length days if you weren't rushing crazily like I was. As of the time of this recording, Seedance 2.0 has still not had its worldwide release. It's not available on Higgsfield or the other major platforms. You can access it though on ur.ai, where you can sign up for an account, but you will need to fill out a form in order to apply for early access to Seedance. The other place that I've found it currently is at bigmotion.ai. It does still seem like faces are still blocked, so currently you are more limited in what you can get out of Seedance 2.0, but hopefully they'll lessen the restrictions by the time it launches worldwide. I have links for both platforms in the description, and if you do try out bigmotion.ai, I'll get a small kickback to support the channel. I'm planning deep dives into all the ways to create dialogue for AI films, a walkthrough of how I use Higgsfield AI to make my films, a breakdown of using Seedance 2.0's reference feature, and tips and strategies for using Nano Banana 2 and Pro. So let me know in the comments which one you want to see first, or if you have any other questions about my process. If you haven't watched Bone Throne yet, make sure to go check it out and subscribe for more breakdowns on AI filmmaking. I'll see you in the next video.